The rain hammered against Grace Keller's face as she stumbled through the muddy darkness, her feet raw and bleeding inside her thin boots, knowing that if she stopped moving, her husband's brothers would find her and drag her back to face a fate worse than death. She had finally done it. After 3 years of living in hell, married to a man whose cruelty knew no bounds, she had waited until Thomas Keller drank himself into a stupor, and then she had run. But Thomas had been dead by morning, choked on his own vomit, and now his brothers were convinced she had murdered him. The truth did not matter to men like the Kellers. They wanted blood, and they would have it unless she could disappear into the vast emptiness of the New Mexico territory. It was September of 1878, and Grace was 22 years old, soaked to the bone and completely alone in the world. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning the dusty trail into a river of mud. She had been walking for 2 days since fleeing the small settlement of Las Cruces, heading north with no clear destination, just the desperate need to put distance between herself and the men who wanted her dead. Lightning split the sky, and in that brief flash of illumination, Grace saw something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. A house, or perhaps a barn, stood perhaps a quarter-mile off the main trail. Shelter. She altered her course, stumbling through the scrub brush and over rocky ground, her sodden skirts clinging to her legs and making every step a battle. She was so focused on reaching that building that she did not see the ravine until she was falling into it. Grace cried out as she tumbled down the rocky slope, her body slamming against stones and thorny bushes. She came to rest at the bottom in a heap, pain radiating through her left ankle and ribs. For a long moment, she simply lay there in the mud and rain, wondering if this was how it would end. Would they find her body days from now, just another woman who had tried to escape and failed? No. Grace gritted her teeth and forced herself to move. The pain in her ankle was excruciating, but she could still crawl. She would reach that house if she had to drag herself the entire way. It took her nearly an hour to climb out of the ravine and make her way to the building. By the time she collapsed against the wooden door, she was barely conscious. With the last of her strength, she pounded her fist against the weathered planks. Inside the house, Warren Mills was sitting at his kitchen table, staring at the half-empty bottle of whiskey and trying to decide whether tonight would be the night he finally drank enough to forget. At 31 years old, he had spent the last 5 years alone on this ranch, isolated from the world by choice. After losing his wife Sarah and their unborn child to fever, he had retreated from life, going through the motions of running his cattle operation but feeling nothing, wanting nothing, expecting nothing. The pounding on his door was so faint at first that he thought it was just the storm. But then it came again, more insistent, and Warren pushed back from the table with a frown. Nobody came out here, not anymore. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the main road to Santa Fe was a good day's ride. He opened the door and nearly stumbled over the woman collapsed on his porch. Even in the darkness and rain, he could see she was in bad shape. Her dress was torn and mud-caked, her dark hair plastered to her face, and she was shaking violently from cold. Warren did not hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, and carried her inside. He kicked the door shut behind him and brought her to the fireplace, laying her on the thick rug in front of the flames. She was conscious, barely, her green eyes unfocused and glazed with pain and exhaustion. "You are safe now," Warren said, though he had no idea if that was true. He did not know who she was running from or why, but the terror in her eyes told him everything he needed to know about her circumstances. "I am going to get you some dry clothes and blankets. Do not try to move." He returned moments later with an armful of supplies. The dry clothes were his own, far too large for her, but they would be warm. He turned his back to give her privacy, but when several minutes passed and he heard no movement, he risked a glance over his shoulder. She was trying to undress, but her hands were shaking too badly to manage the buttons. "Let me help," Warren said gruffly. He had been alone so long that he had forgotten how to gentle his voice. He knelt beside her and worked the buttons of her dress with steady fingers, keeping his eyes on his task and trying not to notice the bruises that covered her arms and shoulders. Whoever this woman was, someone had hurt her badly and repeatedly. Once he had her dressed in his old flannel shirt and wool pants, he wrapped her in blankets and carried her to his bed. She needed rest and warmth more than anything. He built up the fire and then heated water for tea, adding a generous spoonful of honey. When he returned to the bedroom, she was watching him with those remarkable green eyes, still wary but no longer quite so terrified. "Drink this," Warren said, helping her sit up enough to take the cup. She sipped the hot tea and some color began to return to her pale cheeks. "What is your name?" "Grace," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Grace Keller. I am Warren Mills. This is my ranch. You are safe here, Grace." She looked at him for a long moment as if trying to decide whether to believe him, then her eyes filled with tears. "They think I killed him. They are going to hang me if they catch me." "Who is they?" "My husband's brothers, but I did not kill Thomas. He drank himself to death. I just ran while I had the chance." Warren nodded slowly. He did not need to know more than that. He had seen enough of the world to know that women did not run unless they had very good reason. "How badly are you hurt?" "My ankle. I think it might be broken. And my ribs." She touched her left side gingerly. "But I will be fine. I just need to rest for a night and then I will be on my way." "I cannot bring trouble to your door. Your ankle is not broken, but it is badly sprained," Warren said after examining it carefully. "And those ribs need time to heal. You are not going anywhere for at least a few weeks, maybe longer." "I cannot stay here that long. They will find me." "Did anyone see you leave the trail?" "I do not think so. The storm was too heavy." "Then they will not find you. This ranch is not visible from the main road and I do not get visitors. You will stay here until you are healed and then we will figure out what comes next." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling her under. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts to stay awake. Warren watched her for a moment, this broken woman who had stumbled into his life, and felt something stir in his chest that he had thought long dead. Not attraction, not yet. But a sense of purpose, a reason to care about something beyond his own empty existence. He left her to sleep and returned to the kitchen, but he did not touch the whiskey again that night. Instead, he sat by the window and watched the storm, alert for any sign of riders. If these Keller brothers came looking for Grace, they would have to go through him first. The storm broke before dawn, leaving the land washed clean and gleaming in the early light. Warren rose with the sun, as he always did, and went about his morning chores. He had 40 head of cattle to tend, horses to feed, and a ranch to run. The work had been his salvation these past 5 years, the only thing that kept him from drowning in grief and bitterness. But this morning was different. This morning, there was someone in his house who needed him. It was a strange feeling, being needed again. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through a window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The flight from Las Cruces, the storm, the fall, and the stern-faced rancher who had taken her in. She tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot through her ribs. Moving more carefully, she managed to prop herself up against the pillows and take stock of her situation. She was clean and dry, dressed in clothes that smelled of soap and wood smoke. Her ankle was wrapped in strips of cloth, and someone had tended to the cuts and scrapes that covered her hands and feet. Warren appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray. "You should not be moving yet," he said. "Your body needs time to heal." "I have already been too much trouble," Grace protested, but her stomach growled at the sight of the food he set before her. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fresh bread with butter, and strong coffee. It was more food than she had seen in days. "Eat," Warren commanded. "You are nothing but skin and bones. When was the last time you had a proper meal?" Grace could not remember. Thomas had not believed in feeding her regularly. Food was a reward for good behavior, he had said, and she was never quite good enough. She picked up the fork with shaking hands and took a bite of eggs. They were perfectly cooked, fluffy, and seasoned with salt and pepper. She had to force herself to eat slowly, to not wolf down the food like an animal. Warren watched her eat with an expression she could not quite read. There was concern there, but also something darker. Anger, perhaps, though not directed at her. "How long were you married to Thomas Keller?" he asked. 3 years. "I was 19 when my father arranged the marriage. Thomas seemed kind at first. He did not show his true nature until after the wedding. And his brothers, there are 3 of them. Jacob, Samuel, and Eli. They run cattle near Las Cruces, and they think they own the territory. The law will not stand against them. When Thomas died, they decided I had poisoned him, even though everyone knew he drank a bottle of whiskey a day." Her voice was steady, but Warren could hear the fear underneath. "They said they would make an example of me, a public hanging to show what happens to women who step out of line." Warren's jaw tightened. He knew men like the Kellers. The territory was full of them, men who thought power and violence gave them the right to do as they pleased. "You will not go back there," he said flatly. "You will stay here until you are healed, and then we will figure out a way to get you somewhere safe." "Do you have family? Anyone who would take you in?" Grace shook her head. "My parents died of cholera 2 years ago. I have no siblings. Thomas made sure to isolate me from what few friends I had." "Then you will stay here as long as you need to. I have plenty of room, and I could use help around the ranch once you are well enough." "Can you cook?" "Yes, and clean and sew and tend animals. Thomas might have been a bastard, but his mother taught me how to run a household." Warren nodded. "Then we have an arrangement. You will earn your keep, and in exchange, you will have a safe place to stay." "Agreed." Grace looked at him, this tall, broad-shouldered man with gray eyes that were both hard and kind at the same time. She did not know him, had no reason to trust him beyond the fact that he had not hurt her yet, but she also had no other options. "Agreed," she said quietly. The days settled into a routine. Grace spent the first week mostly in bed, letting her body heal. Warren brought her meals and changed the wrapping on her ankle, his hands gentle despite their rough calluses. He did not talk much, but his presence was steady and reassuring. Grace found herself watching him when he was not looking, studying the lean lines of his face and the way he moved with quiet competence. He was not a handsome man, not in the conventional sense. His features were too angular, his jaw too square, and there was a hardness about him that spoke of pain and loss. But there was something compelling about him nonetheless. He was solid, real, a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. By the second week, Grace was able to hobble around the house with the help of a crutch Warren fashioned from a sturdy branch. She insisted on making herself useful despite his protests, starting with small tasks like washing dishes and preparing simple meals. It felt good to work again, to have a purpose beyond simply surviving. Warren came in from the range one afternoon to find his kitchen spotless and the smell of fresh bread filling the house. Grace was at the stove, stirring a pot of stew, her dark hair pulled back in a braid. She was still too thin, still moved carefully because of her healing ribs, but there was color in her cheeks and the haunted look was beginning to fade from her eyes. "You did not have to do all this," Warren said, hanging his hat by the door. "I wanted to. You have done so much for me. This is the least I can do." They ate dinner together that night, and for the first time since Grace had arrived, Warren found himself actually talking. He told her about the ranch, about the challenges of running a cattle operation in this harsh land. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions and offering observations that showed she understood more about ranching than he had expected. "You seem surprised that I know about cattle," Grace said with a slight smile. "Thomas might have been terrible to me, but I paid attention to his business. I thought if I could understand it, maybe I could help him, make him less angry. Did it work? No, nothing worked. He was angry at the world and I was convenient." Warren set down his fork. "I am sorry that happened to you. No woman deserves to be treated that way." "What about you?" Grace asked softly. "You live out here all alone. Surely there is a story there." Warren was quiet for a long moment. He rarely spoke about Sarah, about the life he had lost. But something about Grace's open, honest face made him want to share. "I was married once. Her name was Sarah. She got sick 5 years ago, some kind of fever. She was pregnant with our first child. I rode 2 days to fetch a doctor, but by the time we got back, they were both gone." "I am so sorry," Grace said, and there was such genuine sympathy in her voice that Warren had to look away. "I came out here afterward, bought this land and built this house with my own hands. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I pushed myself to exhaustion every day, maybe I would stop feeling anything at all. And it worked for a while, until you showed up on my doorstep." "What do you mean?" "I mean that for 5 years, I have been going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then you arrived, and suddenly, I remember what it feels like to care about something, to want to protect someone, to look forward to coming home because there will be someone there waiting." He met her eyes. "It terrifies me." Grace reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and light, and Warren felt something crack open inside his chest. "I understand. I have spent 3 years being afraid. Afraid of Thomas, afraid of his brothers, afraid of what my life had become. And now I am here, and I am still afraid, but it is a different kind of fear. I am afraid of hoping that things might be different, that I might be allowed to be happy." Warren turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long time, connected by touch and shared understanding. Neither of them spoke, but words were not necessary. Something was building between them, fragile and new, like the first shoots of green after a long winter. The weeks passed, and Grace grew stronger. Her ankle healed and her ribs stopped aching. She took over most of the household chores, cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that impressed Warren. She also proved surprisingly capable with the animals, showing no fear of the horses or cattle. When one of the cows had a difficult birth, Grace rolled up her sleeves and helped Warren save both the mother and calf. "Where did you learn to do that?" Warren asked, watching her calm the frightened cow with steady hands and a soothing voice. "My father was a farmer in Missouri before we came west. I grew up around animals. It was one of the few parts of my childhood I actually enjoyed." They were standing close together in the barn, both of them covered in blood and birth fluids, and Warren found himself noticing things he had tried not to see. The curve of Grace's cheek, the way her eyes sparkled when she was pleased with herself, the full softness of her mouth. He stepped back, unsettled by the direction of his thoughts. Grace was a woman in trouble, under his protection. He had no right to think of her that way, no right to feel the attraction that was growing stronger every day. But Grace had noticed his retreat, and the flicker of disappointment in her eyes told him that maybe, just maybe, she felt it too. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The cottonwoods along the creek turned yellow, and the air carried the scent of coming winter. Warren knew he needed to make plans. Grace had been with him for nearly 6 weeks, and while he was in no hurry for her to leave, he also knew that this arrangement could not continue indefinitely. People would talk if they knew he had a woman living with him unchaperoned. Not that Warren cared much what people thought, but Grace's reputation was already damaged enough by her connection to the Kellers. He was mending fence one afternoon when he saw the riders. 3 men, moving slowly along the main road, clearly searching for something. Warren's blood ran cold. He left his tools and ran back to the house, bursting through the door with enough force to make Grace jump. "Hide," he said urgently. "Get into the root cellar and do not come out until I tell you it is safe." Grace went pale. "They found me. I do not know, but I am not taking chances. Go now." She disappeared into the cellar just as the riders turned off the road and headed toward the house. Warren grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch, his face carefully neutral. The 3 men who rode up were cut from the same cloth. Hard faces, cold eyes, and the kind of swagger that came from too much power and too little conscience. The oldest was maybe 40 with a scar running down his left cheek. That would be Jacob Keller, Warren guessed. "Help you gentlemen with something," Warren called out. "We are looking for a woman," Jacob said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Dark hair, green eyes, about 22 years old. Goes by the name Grace Keller. She murdered our brother and ran. You seen anyone matching that description?" "Cannot say that I have. I do not get many visitors out here." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "You mind if we take a look around, just to be sure?" "As a matter of fact, I do mind. This is private property and you have no authority here." "We have all the authority we need," the youngest brother Elise snarled. He was perhaps 25, with mean eyes and a cruel mouth. "Our brother was murdered and we aim to see justice done." "From what I hear, your brother drank himself to death," Warren said calmly. "That is not murder, that is foolishness." Jacob's hand moved toward his gun, but the middle brother, Samuel, put a restraining hand on his arm. Samuel was the smart one, Warren realized, the one who would be the most dangerous. "We do not want trouble," Samuel said smoothly. "We are just trying to find our brother's widow. She ran off in a state of distress, and we are worried about her safety. If you do happen to see her, we would appreciate you letting us know. There is a $100 reward for information leading to her whereabouts." "I will keep that in mind," Warren said, though they all knew he was lying. The Kellers sat on their horses for another long moment, clearly debating whether to push the issue. But Warren stood his ground, rifle held in a casual but ready position, and eventually Jacob spat in the dirt and turned his horse around. "We will be back this way," Jacob called over his shoulder. "And if we find out you are hiding her, you will regret it." Warren waited until they were out of sight before he allowed himself to relax. He went back into the house and opened the cellar. Grace was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, her face white with terror. "They are gone," Warren said gently. "You are safe. For how long? They will keep looking and eventually they will find me. Maybe I should just go try to get to California or somewhere far away." "You are not going anywhere, not alone and not until we have a better plan." Grace looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this? You could have just told them I was here, collected the reward and been done with me. Why are you risking yourself for a stranger?" Warren crouched down beside her and cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "You are not a stranger anymore, Grace. You have not been a stranger for a long time." And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not tentative or questioning. It was fierce and desperate, fueled by weeks of growing attraction and the realization of how close he had come to losing her. Grace made a small sound of surprise and then kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt as if she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I cannot lose you," he said roughly. "I know I have no right to feel this way. I know you have been through hell and probably do not want another man making demands on you, but I have to tell you the truth. Somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Grace laughed, the sound edged with tears. "You fool. I have been in love with you for weeks. I just thought you would never see me as anything more than a charity case." "A charity case?" Warren pulled back to look at her. "Grace, you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. You survived 3 years of abuse, escaped certain death, and rebuilt yourself from nothing. You are extraordinary. I am the charity case here. I was half dead inside until you came along and reminded me how to live." Grace kissed him again, softer this time, and then let him help her to her feet. They stood in the dim cellar holding each other, and for the first time in years both of them felt hope. But that night, lying in his bed while Grace slept in the room that had become hers, Warren made a decision. Love was not enough to keep Grace safe. The Kellers would keep looking and they would not give up. He needed to find a way to end this threat permanently, and that meant he needed help. The next morning he told Grace his plan. "I am going into Santa Fe. There is a territorial marshal there, a man named Carson who I served with during the war. If anyone can help us, it is him. That is a 2-day ride. What if the Kellers come back while you are gone? Then you hide again. But I do not think they will return so soon. They are probably checking every ranch and settlement within 100 miles. It will be a while before they circle back this way." Grace did not like it, but she understood the necessity. Still, when Warren mounted his horse the next morning, she could not help the fear that clutched at her heart. "Come back to me," she said, gripping his hand tightly. "Always," Warren promised. Then he leaned down and kissed her, not caring if it was proper or not. She was his and he was hers, and the rest of the world could go to hell. The ride to Santa Fe seemed to take forever. Warren pushed hard, stopping only to rest his horse, his mind consumed with thoughts of Grace. What if the Kellers did come back? What if something happened while he was gone? He should have brought her with him. Damn the propriety of it. He reached Santa Fe in the late afternoon of the second day and went straight to the marshal's office. Daniel Carson was older now, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp and his handshake firm. "Warren Mills, I will be damned. What brings you to civilization?" Warren explained the situation quickly and efficiently. Carson listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Warren finished, the marshal leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I know the Kellers. They are a poison in this territory. But you need to understand, Warren, my jurisdiction is limited. I can investigate Thomas Keller's death, but unless I can prove they are planning to murder this woman, my hands are tied." "So what are you saying? That Grace has to wait until they actually kill her before the law will act?" "I am saying that I need evidence. Give me something I can use and I will bring them in. But right now, it is their word against hers, and she is the one who ran." Warren's hands clenched into fists. "She ran because they threatened to hang her for a murder she did not commit. I believe you. But I need proof, witnesses, something that will stand up in a court." Warren thought hard. The doctor who examined Thomas's body, he would have seen that there was no poison, that the man died from alcohol and neglect. That is a start. Who was the doctor? "A man named Pritchard, practices in Las Cruces." Carson nodded slowly. "I know Pritchard. He is a good man, honest. If he examined the body and found no evidence of poison, he will testify to it. I will send a deputy down there to take his statement. In the meantime, you keep that woman hidden. And Warren, be careful. The Kellers have a lot of friends in this territory. Not everyone will be on your side." Warren thanked him and left, but he did not head straight home. Instead, he went to the general store and bought supplies. Ammunition, food staples, and a rifle that he thought Grace might be able to handle. He also stopped at the jeweler, staring at the rings in the display case for a long time before making a purchase that both terrified and exhilarated him. He made the return journey in record time, pushing himself and his horse to the limit. He reached his ranch late in the afternoon of the third day, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw smoke rising from the chimney. That meant Grace was inside, safe. She had not been taken. He found her in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, and the relief that washed over him was so intense it made him dizzy. Grace looked up and saw him, and then she was running, throwing herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. "I was so worried," she said against his chest. 3 days felt like 3 years. "I know. I felt the same way." Warren held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "But I have good news. The marshal is going to help us. He is getting a statement from the doctor who examined Thomas's body. Once he has that, he will have grounds to bring the Kellers in for questioning. And if the doctor refuses to help, he will not. Carson said Pritchard is an honest man, and even if he was not, the truth is on our side. Thomas died from his own drinking. Anyone with eyes could have seen that." Grace pulled back enough to look up at him. "What if it is not enough? What if the Kellers have enough influence to make this go away? Then we will figure something else out. But Grace, I need you to know something. No matter what happens, I am not letting you go. You are mine now, and I protect what is mine." There was a possessiveness in his voice that should have frightened her, given her history. But Grace felt no fear, only a deep certainty that with Warren she was finally safe. "I am yours," she agreed. "And you are mine." Warren reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's eyes went wide as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I know this is fast. I know you just escaped one marriage and probably never wanted to think about another one. But I love you, Grace. I want you to be my wife, not just because it will help protect you, though it will, but because I cannot imagine my life without you anymore. You brought light back into my darkness. You gave me a reason to live again. Say you will marry me." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes, yes, Warren, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, and the kiss was full of promise and passion and a future they would build together. They were married a week later in Santa Fe, with Marshal Carson and his wife serving as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate affair Grace's first wedding had been. But it was real and full of love, and when Warren said his vows, Grace knew he meant every word. "I, Warren Mills, take you, Grace Keller, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and love you for all the days of my life. I promise to be the shelter you need, the partner you deserve, and the man you can trust with your heart." Grace spoke her own vows through tears. "I, Grace Keller, take you, Warren Mills, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by your side, to be your home and your haven, to love you through whatever troubles may come. You saved my life in more ways than one, and I will spend the rest of my days showing you what that means to me." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed his bride with a gentleness that belied the fierce emotions swirling inside him. Grace was his now, legally and forever. No one could take her away. They spent their wedding night at a hotel in Santa Fe, and for the first time in her life, Grace learned what it meant to be with a man who loved her. Warren was patient and tender, taking his time to show her that physical intimacy could be about pleasure and connection, not pain and power. By the time morning came, Grace felt reborn, as if the woman who had been married to Thomas Keller had never existed. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Grace threw herself into making the house truly a home. She sewed curtains for the windows and planted a garden near the back door. She learned to bake bread the way Warren liked it, slightly sweet with a crispy crust. She mended his clothes and organized his books and filled the empty rooms with laughter and warmth. Warren, in turn, taught her to ride properly and showed her every corner of his land. They worked side by side, mending fences and moving cattle, and Grace discovered that she loved the work. There was something satisfying about ending the day exhausted and knowing you had accomplished something tangible. But the shadow of the Kellers still hung over them. A month after their marriage, Marshal Carson sent word that he had interviewed Dr. Pritchard, and the physician had confirmed that Thomas Keller died of natural causes related to chronic alcohol abuse. There was no evidence of poison or foul play. Carson had brought the Kellers in for questioning, but without proof of an actual crime, he could not hold them. "They are furious," Carson wrote in his letter. "Jacob Keller made threats against you and your wife. I want you to be careful, Warren. These are dangerous men, and they do not take well to being thwarted." Warren showed the letter to Grace, and he saw the fear flicker across her face, but she lifted her chin and met his eyes steadily. "They will come for us, will they not? Maybe. Probably. But if they do, we will be ready." Warren spent the next week preparing. He reinforced the doors and windows, laid in extra ammunition, and made sure Grace knew how to shoot. She was a natural with a rifle, her hand steady and her eye true. Warren found himself grateful for whatever hardships had made her strong, even as he raged at the men who had put her through them. They did not have to wait long. The Kellers came on a cold November night, 3 men on horseback with guns drawn and murder in their eyes. But Warren and Grace were ready. They had seen the riders from a distance, had watched them approach, and when the Kellers were within range, Warren stepped out onto the porch with his rifle leveled. "That is far enough," he called out. "You are trespassing on private property. Turn around and leave, or I will drop all 3 of you where you sit." Jacob Keller laughed, the sound ugly in the darkness. "You think you can protect her, Mills? She is a murderer, and we are taking her back to face justice. Your brother died from drinking too much whiskey." Dr. Pritchard confirmed it. The marshal confirmed it. "The only crime here is you 3 refusing to accept the truth. The truth is that little witch poisoned our brother," Illy spat, "and we are going to see her hang for it." "Over my dead body," Warren said flatly. "That can be arranged," Jacob said, and then all 3 men drew their guns. What happened next was fast and brutal. Warren fired first, his bullet taking Illy in the shoulder and spinning him off his horse. Samuel got off a shot that splintered the porch railing near Warren's head, but then a second rifle cracked from inside the house, and Samuel's hat went flying. The man yelped and dove for cover behind his horse. Jacob was the only one who kept his head. He aimed carefully at Warren, but before he could fire, Grace appeared in the doorway with a shotgun braced against her shoulder. "Drop it," she said, her voice deadly calm, "or I will blow you out of that saddle." Jacob looked at her, and for the first time something like respect flickered in his eyes. Then he slowly lowered his gun. "This is not over," he said. "Yes, it is," said a new voice. Marshal Carson rode into the yard with 2 deputies, their badges glinting in the moonlight. "Jacob Keller, you and your brothers are under arrest for attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon." "You have no proof," Jacob snarled. "I have 3 witnesses who will testify that you came here intending to kill Warren and Grace Mills." I have a doctor's statement that proves Thomas Keller was not murdered, and I have a territorial judge who is very interested in the Keller family's activities. You are finished, Jacob. All three of you." The deputies disarmed the Kellers and bound their hands. Ellie was bleeding badly, but Carson showed no sympathy. "Should have thought about that before you decided to play vigilante. We will get you to a doctor, but then you are going to jail." After the Kellers were hauled away, Carson turned to Warren and Grace. "I figured they might try something like this, so I have been keeping watch on your place from a distance. Good thing I did." "We are grateful," Warren said, shaking the marshal's hand. "What happens now? Now they go on trial. And with the evidence we have, plus the fact that they just tried to murder 2 people in front of witnesses, I expect they will be going to prison for a long time. Maybe not forever, but long enough. You will be safe, Mrs. Mills." Grace sagged against Warren, the adrenaline draining out of her all at once. "It is really over. It is really over," Carson confirmed. "Go on and live your life. You have earned it." After the marshal left, Warren carried Grace inside and they sat together in front of the fire, not speaking, just holding each other. The danger had passed. The threat was gone. They were free. "I shot at a man tonight," Grace said quietly. "I never thought I would be capable of that." "You were protecting our home. There is no shame in that. I know. It just feels strange. For so long I was helpless, and now I am not." Warren kissed her temple. "You were never helpless, Grace. You survived things that would have broken most people. You were always strong. You just needed a chance to show it." Winter came to New Mexico with cold winds and occasional snow. Warren and Grace settled into married life, their days full of work and their nights full of warmth. Grace discovered she was pregnant in late December, and Warren was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked, his hand spread protectively over her still flat belly. "What if I lose you the way I lost Sarah?" "You will not lose me," Grace said firmly. "I am strong and we will have a good doctor attending me. But Warren, I need you to promise me something. If it comes down to a choice between me and the baby, you choose me. Do you understand? You choose me." Warren's throat was tight. "I could not bear to lose either of you, I know. But I need to hear you say it. Promise me." "I promise. I choose you always." The pregnancy progressed smoothly and Grace bloomed with health. She was sick in the mornings for the first few months, but Warren took over the cooking without complaint, learning to make simple meals that would not upset her stomach. He was attentive and protective, sometimes overly so, but Grace found his concern endearing rather than suffocating. She gave birth in late August of 1879 to a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him James Warren Mills, and Warren cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with gratitude and love. "Thank you," he whispered to Grace, who was exhausted but smiling. "Thank you for giving me a family again. Thank you for making me whole." "We made each other whole," Grace said, reaching up to touch his face. "You saved me and I saved you. That is what love is supposed to do." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Warren's life. He threw himself into being a father with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He changed diapers and walked the floor with James when the baby was fussy. He sang off-key lullabies and made silly faces to elicit smiles. He was a natural parent in a way he had never allowed himself to imagine being again. Grace watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand with love. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark years with Thomas. A home filled with laughter. A husband who treated her as an equal partner. A child born of love rather than obligation. News came in the spring of 1880 that the Keller brothers had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. Jacob and Samuel had been found guilty of attempted murder, while Ali received a lighter sentence due to his youth and the fact that he had been following his brother's lead. It was not forever, but it was long enough. By the time they got out, Warren and Grace would be well established, and the Kellers would have no power over them. "Does it feel real yet?" Warren asked Grace one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James asleep in his mother's arms. "That we are actually safe, that we get to keep this." "Some days it does," Grace admitted. "Other days I wake up expecting it all to be a dream, expecting to find myself back in that house in Las Cruces with Thomas yelling at me. But then I see you and I see James and I remember that this is real. We made this. We fought for it and we earned it." Warren put his arm around her and pulled her close. "I love you, Grace Mills, more than I ever thought possible. You are everything I never knew I needed." "And you are my shelter," Grace said softly. "When I was running through that storm, all I was looking for was a place to hide, but I found so much more. I found home. I found love. I found myself." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and purple, Warren and Grace sat together in perfect contentment. They had both been broken when they found each other, both lost and alone. But together, they had built something beautiful and strong. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in honor of Warren's first wife, born in 1882, and another son, Thomas, in 1885. Grace had insisted on the name, wanting to reclaim it and fill it with love instead of pain. James grew into a serious boy who loved working with his father, learning everything he could about ranching. Sarah was bright and fearless, with her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. Little Thomas was still a toddler, but he showed signs of being the most easygoing of the 3, always smiling and content. The ranch prospered under Warren and Grace's joint management. Grace had a head for numbers and took over the bookkeeping, discovering that they could increase their profits by selling beef directly to the Army forts rather than going through middlemen. Warren expanded the herd and improved the breeding stock. Together, they built something that would last, something they could pass down to their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren took Grace on a trip to Albuquerque, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor. It was the first time they had been alone together since James was born, and they reveled in the freedom and romance of it. "Do you ever regret it?" Warren asked as they lay together in their hotel room, the sounds of the city muffled by the walls. "Taking me on, I mean." "You could have gone to California, started fresh somewhere no one knew you. Instead, you tied yourself to a moody rancher in the middle of nowhere." Grace propped herself up on her elbow and looked at him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip a beat. "Not for one single second. You gave me everything I never dared to hope for: safety, love, a family, a purpose. You saw me when I was at my lowest and you did not turn away. How could I ever regret that? I am the one who should be grateful. Before you came, I was just going through the motions. I was not really living. You changed everything." "We changed everything," Grace corrected. "Together. That is what makes this work, Warren. We are partners. We lift each other up." Warren pulled her down for a kiss, slow and deep and full of the passion that still burned between them after 10 years. They made love with the lazy contentment of long-time lovers who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. And afterward, they held each other and talked until dawn about their dreams for the future. They returned home to find the ranch running smoothly and their children healthy and happy. Life settled back into its familiar patterns, but Warren and Grace never took it for granted. They had both known too much loss, too much pain. They understood that happiness was precious and fragile, something to be protected and cherished, more years passed. James grew into a young man, taking on more responsibility around the ranch. At 18, he was nearly as tall as his father and twice as serious. Sarah, at 16, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, much to Warren's dismay. Thomas was 13 and showing an interest in medicine, spending hours reading every book on the subject he could get his hands on. Warren and Grace were in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind. But they were happy, deeply and contentedly happy in a way neither had thought possible in their youth. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, Grace leaned her head on Warren's shoulder and sighed with satisfaction. "We did it," she said softly. "We built a good life." "We did," Warren agreed. "Against all odds, we found each other and we built something that will outlast us both." "Do you think about Sarah sometimes? Your first wife," Warren was quiet for a moment. "I do. I think she would be happy that I found you, that I did not spend my whole life mourning. She was a kind woman, Grace. She would have liked you." "I hope so. I like to think that she sent me to you in a way, that she knew you needed someone to bring you back to life. Maybe she did. Or maybe we were just lucky. Either way, I am grateful for every day I have had with you." Grace turned to kiss him, and even after all these years, the touch of her lips still made Warren's heart race. "I love you, Warren Mills. Thank you for being my shelter when I needed one." "And thank you for being mine," Warren replied. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." As the sun disappeared below the horizon, they went inside to their home, their children, their life. It was not the life either of them had planned or expected. It was better. It was real and hard-won and full of love. And it was theirs forever. Years later, when Warren was 70 and Grace 68, they sat on that same porch with a passel of grandchildren playing in the yard. James had taken over day-to-day operations of the ranch, having married a schoolteacher from Santa Fe. Sarah had married her rancher's son and lived on the neighboring spread. Thomas had become a doctor and practiced in Albuquerque, but he came home often with his wife and children. Warren and Grace were slowing down now, content to let the younger generation take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and each other. They still did the evening chores together when their bodies allowed it, still sat on the porch at sunset, still shared a bed and a life that had outlasted all the troubles that had threatened to destroy them. "You remember the night we met?" Grace asked, watching her oldest grandson attempt to rope a fence post. "When I collapsed on your doorstep in that storm, how could I forget? You looked like a drowned cat. I thought you might die before morning. I thought I might die too. I was ready to give up. And then you opened that door and you looked at me like I was worth saving. That made all the difference, you know. After so long being told I was worthless, having someone look at me like I mattered." Warren took her hand, his fingers gnarled with arthritis but his grip still strong. "You have always mattered. You always will. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace, the very best thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and red. 40 years had passed since that stormy night when a desperate woman found refuge with a lonely rancher. 40 years of love and partnership, of raising children and building a legacy. Inside the house, Grace could hear her daughters-in-law preparing dinner, their children's laughter mixing with the sounds of cooking. This was her family, her home, her life. She had run from death and found everything worth living for. Warren looked at his wife, seeing past the wrinkles and gray hair to the fierce, frightened woman who had changed his life. She was still beautiful to him, still the most extraordinary person he had ever known. He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "What was that for?" Grace asked with a smile. Just because I can. Because I love you and I never want to stop telling you so. Grace squeezed his hand. Then do not stop. I will never get tired of hearing it. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. They had been broken when they met, both running from pain and loss. But together they had healed. Together they had thrived. Grace had come to Warren's ranch seeking shelter from her troubles, expecting nothing more than a temporary refuge. Instead, she had found a home, a partner, and a love that had transformed them both. And Warren, who had shut himself away from the world, had discovered that sometimes the greatest shelter is not a place, but a person who sees your broken pieces and loves you anyway. Their story was not one of grand adventure or dramatic heroics. It was quieter than that, more real. It was about two wounded people who took a chance on each other and built something lasting from the ruins of their past. It was about courage and kindness and the transformative power of love. As the stars began to appear in the vast New Mexico sky, Warren and Grace went inside to join their family for dinner. The house was full of warmth and laughter, full of life and love. It was everything they had built together, and it was good. Grace caught Warren's eye across the crowded table and smiled. He smiled back, and in that exchange was a lifetime of shared history, of trials overcome and joys celebrated. They had found each other against all odds, and they had held on tight through everything life had thrown at them. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Warren watched Grace brush out her long silver hair. She caught him looking in the mirror and raised an eyebrow. "What are you staring at, old man?" "My wife. My beautiful, incredible wife." Grace turned to face him. "After all these years, you still say things like that." "After all these years, I still mean them." Warren crossed to her and took her in his arms. "I was thinking about that night you arrived, about how close you came to not finding this place, about how different my life would be if you had not. I was thinking the same thing. What if the storm had not driven me off the road? What if I had gone in a different direction? I would have died out there, Warren, or the Kellers would have caught me. Either way, I would not be here. But you are here. You found me, or I found you, or maybe we found each other. And everything that came after was because we were brave enough to trust each other." Grace rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. And then you gave me so much more. You gave me a life worth living. And you did the same for me. My heart was a cold, empty place before you came along. You brought me back to life, Grace. You became the shelter I did not even know I needed." They stood like that for a long time, two people who had found in each other something rare and precious. Their love had not been easy or simple. It had been forged in adversity and tempered by time. But it had endured, and it would endure until their last breath. As they finally climbed into bed, Warren pulled Grace close and she settled into the curve of his body as naturally as breathing. This was home, not the ranch or the house or the land, but this connection, this love. This partnership that had sustained them through 4 decades of life's ups and downs. "Good night, my love," Warren whispered into her hair. "Good night," Grace replied. "See you in the morning." And there would be a morning and many mornings after that. Not forever, because nothing in this life lasts forever. But for now, for this moment and all the moments to come, they had each other. They had their family. They had their home. They had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. And that was more than either of them had dared to dream possible on that stormy night so long ago, when a desperate woman had knocked on a lonely rancher's door and changed both of their lives forever. In the end, theirs was a simple story. A story of two broken people who healed each other. a story of shelter and safety and love. A story that proved that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, in the hard year of 1878 and all the years that followed, two people could find each other and build something lasting. Grace had sought shelter from her troubles, and Warren had given it freely. But in doing so, he had found his own shelter in her strength and courage and love. They had saved each other, and in saving each other, they had found the happiness that had eluded them both for so long. Their children and grandchildren would remember them not for their hardships, but for their love. They would tell stories about the grandmother who had been brave enough to run from danger, and the grandfather who had been kind enough to take her in. They would speak of a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection, a marriage that had stood the test of time. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the New Mexico plain and the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, those who knew the story would remember. They would remember the lonely rancher who gave a desperate woman shelter and how she became the shelter his heart had been seeking all along. It was a good story, a true story, a love story, and it was theirs.